Hello everyone, today we're going to be going over the January 2025 Living Environment Regents Exam. In this video, we're going to be focusing on Part A, which are the first 30 multiple choice questions. A link to this test can be found in the description of this video if you want to follow along at home. And this video is a part of a bigger series where I'm going to go over every single question from every single part of this test. So, the videos going over Part B1, B2, C, and D have already been uploaded. The links to them can be found in the description of this one. That being said, we're going to go ahead and start off with number 1, which asks us, when you cut your finger, new skin quickly grows that repairs and replaces the damaged skin cells. Information directing this process is located in the blank. Okay, so what is this process? What is the process by which our body repairs and replaces its own skin? Right, or its own cells. And that process is going to be mitosis, right? Mitosis or mitotic cell division is when you have one cell and it's making a direct copy of itself. It's splitting into two identical cells, right? So this new copy is meant to repair or replace the cells that have already been damaged, right? So in multicellular organisms with many cells, they undergo mitosis to repair and replace their own cells. It doesn't just have to be skin cells, any type of non-sex cell. All right, so it can't be choices 2 or 4 because they are saying that this is meiotic cell division, and that's wrong because meiotic cell division or meiosis is the production of sperm or eggs, right? Now, if you have a cut on your hand, you don't need to produce sperm or egg cells. You need to produce more skin cells, right? So mitosis is the repair or the duplication of your non-sex cells, right? That's how you make more non-sex cells. Meiosis is how you make sex cells. Right? Skin cells are non-sex cells, so we need to undergo mitosis. And now it's asking about the information that directs this process. So we know what this process is, but where is the information coming from? And obviously it's from the DNA, right? The DNA is the instruction manual for the cell. It pretty much tells the body how to make more copies of itself, or the cells inside of your body how to make more copies of themselves, right? It's this double helix structure right here. You can think about it as just a blueprint or an instruction manual. So when the cell wants to divide, it reads its instruction manual and then it makes a new copy of itself. So that's why it's choice 3. The mitochondria, on the other hand, provide the energy, not the information. Number 2 asks where ATP is produced, and we know it's automatically produced in the mitochondria, right? Ribosomes make proteins, vacuoles contain certain or store certain elements and molecules inside of your cells. And finally, nuclei hold the DNA, which is that blueprint molecule, right? Mitochondria produce ATP through cellular respiration. Number 3 says that some trees release toxins into the soil that can kill the plants nearby. This ability can be best described as what? Well, if we're killing the plants nearby, it can't be choices 1 or 2, right? Because if we're killing the plants nearby, we're decreasing biodiversity. Biodiversity just tells you how many unique species are around you. If you're killing off the animals and plants around you, guess what? You are decreasing the biodiversity. And if you're decreasing the biodiversity and harming other plants, that means you're clearly not establishing a consistent soil pH, because consistent soil pHs are what plants need to survive, right? So if you're actively killing plants, that means you're messing with that soil pH. It's not constant. So now we're choosing between choices 3 and 4. And in this case, this is going to be an evolutionary advantage, reducing competition for water, nutrients, and sunlight. And if we think about this, right, let's say that this is our tree that releases, or this is our plant that releases toxins. If it's surrounded by these other trees and these other grasses, all of a sudden, guess what? The sun can get to this plant less effectively, right? These other bigger trees block it off, and at the same time, they suck up all the water from the soil, so this tree can't grow as tall, right? So they're competing over space, over sunlight, over water, and over nutrients. But if all of a sudden this plant releases these toxins, well, this tree dies, the grass is gone, and guess what? It has all of the water it wants, all the sunlight it wants, okay? The reason why it's not choice 3 is because choice 3 says it's a trait acquired by the species to eliminate the consumers that feed on them. Well, is it killing consumers or is it killing the plants nearby? It's killing the plants nearby. Remember, plants are producers, not consumers. So plants don't eat other plants. Plants just compete with resources with other plants, okay? So it's not choice 3 because it's calling plants consumers, which they clearly aren't. Number 4 says when the frequency of a gene in a population changes, the most likely result would be what? Well, a gene is a section of your DNA that codes for a physical trait or something, right? It codes for the production of something that we can physically see, right? So in this case, it could this section of this DNA molecule could be a gene. The way I like to think about it is it's a section of your blueprint, right? So it's like a specific section. It's like, oh, if this was a blueprint for a house, oh, this is the blueprint on how to make windows, right? So if this if this gene changes, all of a sudden you now are making new windows, right? Well, you're making a new type of house, right? And if you're changing the type of house you are, let's relate this back to biology, of course. If you are expressing different traits, if you physically look different, if you physically behave different, guess what? You are evolving, right? Biological evolution is literally talking about the changes in the genes, a genetic change in a species over many, many generations, right? So that's why choice 4 has to be, number 4 has to be choice 2, because that is what evolution is, right? Choice 1 is wrong because ecological succession talks about an entire environment, not a specific species. And choice 3 is wrong because even if your species is changing its genes, that doesn't mean it's going extinct. That species is still alive, just under a brand new coat of paint, right? It just looks different now. It acts different now, but it's not extinct. All right, number 5 says during the 1880s, in an attempt to control the rat population, the Asian mongoose was brought to the Hawaiian Islands. However, there was a flaw in the plan. Rats are active at night, while the mongoose fed on birds and eggs during the day. It had little effect on the rat population, and the mongoose population rapidly increased and caused the extinction of many bird species native to the island. It's asking us, what is this an example of? Well, this is an example of a research plan because if you're making a research plan, you're trying to collect data. They did not try to collect any data here. They tried to come up with a solution. Now, did their solution work? No, it did not work because guess what? The mongoose did not kill any of the rats. Instead, what the mongoose did was it killed native birds. So it can't be choice 4 and it can't be choice 1 because choice 1 and 4 talk about humans fixing a problem. The problem wasn't fixed here. What they did was they altered the ecosystem by bringing in a non-native species that resulted in unintended consequences, right? The extinction of native bird species. Number 6 says, many countries today are looking for ways to reduce the use of finite resources. They are working to recycle, reuse, and repair more product to reduce dumping and pollution. Which statement best describes a positive result of these changes? So if we're looking at a positive result, we know that it can't be choices 3 and 4. Choice 3 says this will result in an unstable ecosystem. Guys, being unstable is bad. An unstable ecosystem is a bad ecosystem, right? We want positive results. This is a negative one. And the same thing with 4. If you destroy an ecosystem, that's crazy bad for the planet, right? The planet needs ecosystems. You need high biodiversity. So if you're decreasing biodiversity, destroying ecosystems, disrupting ecosystems, that's a negative result. So now we're stuck between choices 1 and 2, right? Fossil fuels will be renewed for future generations to utilize. Let's think about that, right? Well, what the companies want to do is they want to recycle, reuse, and repair stuff made out of finite resources. Finite resources are non-renewable resources, stuff that we can't grow back. Renewable. I spelled that wrong, but you guys get the point, right? Non-renewable resources, stuff that we cannot get back. Like fossil fuels, we can't just magically make more fossil fuels. So if we begin to recycle and reuse stuff and repair stuff, that doesn't mean that we magically gain the ability to make more fossil fuels. That just means that we will use fossil fuels less. We'll deplete our supply slower, right? If you need fossil fuel, let's just say that this is oil, to make, a plastic water bottle, and all of a sudden, let's say we have this plastic water bottle now. Instead of throwing out this plastic water bottle and just making a new one out of this oil, I can just recycle this, right? I can turn this plastic into a new plastic water bottle, which turns back into this plastic water bottle, which can be recycled 1,000 times, right? I'm now making more plastic without actually using the fossil fuels that it came out of, which means that we're using it less quickly. All right. Number 7 asks which characteristics would give one species the highest advantage over the other species, and this has to be choice 1, highest number of surviving offspring. As a species, your goal is to reproduce as many times as possible and to have the highest number of surviving offspring, right? That's how you carry on a gene. A species, right? It's a member or it's a population of animals that have that same genetic blueprint, right? So in order for a species to continue, those genes need to be present within its members, right? Again and again and again. The way that you do that is by passing on your genes from one generation to another, to another, to another. So if you have a lot of individuals in one generation, that means that they can reproduce more successfully and then pass their genes on as well, right? If you have a low number of mating, you're producing a low number of offspring, a low number of children, right? If you're producing one child in your entire lifespan, that means that your species population isn't growing very rapidly, and that means that you're not passing on your genes as quickly or as effectively to as many people as you can, right? Lower adaptation to the environment makes your species more prone to extinction because you want to be the highest adapted or the best adapted to your environment, and a higher rate of disease just makes you die quicker because guess what? You're going to be sick all the time. Right, so number 8 represents ecological succession. This is what ecological succession talks about, right? It's a change in the species in an environment. You can see here how this barren field started with nothing in it, and all of a sudden a hardwood forest grew out of it, right? Obviously, it's not all of a sudden, it came over, hundreds or decades. But regardless, what happened here was that the community became more stable because the biodiversity increased. The biodiversity is talking about the number of unique species in an environment. So if we look here, we started with nothing, 0 unique species, and now all of a sudden we have 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 4 new species of wood or trees, right, that make up this hardwood forest. So the biodiversity is affected, and it did not decrease, it actually increased, which increased the stability, right? The more biodiverse you are, the more diverse your environment is, the more stable it is. Right, so number 9 gives us this graph. It tells us temperature change versus the year, and we can see that we've risen on average. The global temperature has changed by 1 degree Celsius, and it's asking us for the explanation for this increase. So let's talk about how the world actually gets its heat from and how we stay warm. So if this tiny ball here represents our planet, and this black area around it represents our atmosphere, the way that we get our heat is from the sun, right? The sun emits these rays, and they travel throughout space for millions and millions of miles, and they hit us, right? They hit the earth. Once they hit the earth, the energy is converted into heat, right? And we transfer it onto our surface. That's what warms us up. So either it gets absorbed, or it gets absorbed and then bounced back into space, right? Normally, that's what happens. So that's what's causing our Earth to maintain a temperature. Now, what's causing that temperature to increase? Let's look at these answer choices. So 1 says a decrease in the amount of sunlight reaching the Earth each year. So that would actually make us colder, right? Because each one of these rays represents heat that's warming us up. So if all of a sudden I stop sending out rays, or I send out rays at a slower rate, or very rarely, guess what? The Earth will heat up less, and we will actually cool down because we need more of these rays to warm us up. 2 is also wrong because an increase in the amount of solar radiation reflected back into space. Well, if something is reflected back into space, guess what? That means it didn't hit the Earth to begin with, right? It's being reflected out of our atmosphere, and these rays aren't touching or penetrating into the Earth's surface anymore to warm us up, right? So this reflection is actually cooling us down. 3 is the correct answer here. A changing concentration of gases in the atmosphere talks about greenhouse gases, right? When we release greenhouse gases, they essentially coat our atmosphere with this layer of thick gas that traps the heat from the sun. So when our rays enter, right, and hit the Earth's surface, instead of bouncing back into space normally, they actually try, but then they get hit by this layer of greenhouse gases and then get bounced back onto the Earth, and it traps all the heat here, which is causing our Earth to heat up, right? So number 10 says 2 different species of animals prefer the same plant for food. One eats the leaves of the plant and the other prefers the fruit. By eating different parts of the same plant, these species can successfully coexist because they do not compete for limited resources, right? Whenever 2 animals coexist meaning that they can live together, that means that they're not competing for resources, okay? If they live in the same area, they're competing for space. If they interact in a predator-prey relationship, guess what? They're not coexisting. They're not living together. They're not living by side, because guess what? One is killing the other for food, right? So that's a predatory-prey relationship, right? That's not coexisting technically. Coexisting means that, hey, these 2 animals can exist, and the increase in one's population will not lead to a decrease in the other's population, right? They are pretty much interacting with the environment, but not with themselves, right? And certainly not in a negative relationship like with predator and prey, all right? And choice 3 doesn't really have to do anything. If they reproduce at the same time of year, if anything, that would increase their competition, because now all their offspring have to compete for more food, and there's a bigger strain and demand for food in that environment. But again, they don't compete for limited resources, right? The major reason why animals compete, or 2 species cannot coexist, is because they have the same food source. In this case, they have different food sources. One eats the leaves, the other eats the berries, so they're both okay with one another. Number 11 says that different techniques are used to study cells. Fluorescent tags allow scientists to visualize specific proteins as they are synthesized inside of cells. Guys, remember, synthesize means being made, or to be made. Which part of a cell would be studied when using this technology to visualize protein synthesis? So if you want to look at protein synthesis, what you could do is you could put these fluorescent tags and they highlight wherever that's happening. But where is protein synthesis happen? right? Synthesis means to be made. So where are proteins being made? Well, they're being made in the ribosome, right? That is where proteins are made. So that's the part that will glow, because these fluorescent tags will highlight wherever proteins are being made in the ribosome. Number 12 shows or tells us that the image below shows a recently discovered fossil of an unhatched egg of a theropod dinosaur. The dinosaur is in a pre-hatching position similar to bird embryos and unhatched eggs today. Prior to finding the fossil, this behavior was never seen in animals other than birds, and they're asking us to explain how this could be. And whenever you see a similarity between two species, right, whether both of them are alive today, or both of them are extinct, or one is alive, one is extinct, any similarities between two different species is due to a common ancestor, right? A common ancestor is a species that they evolved from, right? So whatever species they evolved from, they had to take some of those traits, some of those evolved behaviors with them. In this case, however many millions of years ago, dinosaurs split off from this common ancestor, and then, chickens split off from dinosaurs at some point, if you want to look at it like a tree, right? But somewhere along the way, they shared some sort of genetic similarity, or they shared some sort of behavior with this common ancestor, right? So whenever species act alike or look alike, it's most likely due to a common ancestor, someone that both species are related to, and someone that they gained some sort of traits from that they now express in the current world, right? So even though dinosaurs are still extinct, they could have come from a ancestor that birds also came from, right? That had that same behavior. All right, number 13 says that the graph below represents the amount of stored energy in each level of an energy pyramid, and is asking us to describe the decrease in stored energy level between energy level 1 and energy level 4. So why is the total amount of energy in level 1 going down, right? If we start with this amount of energy, why is it going down? Well, this is representing an energy pyramid, which looks something like this. Right, on the bottom ring, it tells you all the energy that the producers have, followed by the consumers, followed by their consumers, followed by the last set of consumers, or the apex predators, right? And the area or the width of this base, right, of each one of these bases pretty much tells you how much energy there is. And you can see that the energy is decreasing per each level because it's being produced, is converted as heat. Whenever you convert energy, it's never a clean conversion. Some of it is bled off as heat. So as a result, all of the energy stored in the plants aren't converted directly into energy that are used by the consumers, right? In eating those plants, right, they're using some of that energy to actually eat or to exist, or just in converting that plant energy into energy that, let's say that this was the total amount of energy stored in grass, and this is the total amount of energy stored in cows, right? Energy is in this is all the sugars, all the fats that they store. So you could see that the energy decreases because when you're converting from this plant energy from the first pyramid, from the first level, to the plant to the animal energy in the second level, that conversion is not perfect, right? Some of it is always lost to heat, which is what we see here. Number 14 says, in a sexually reproducing species of a plant, which change could occur that would have an effect on the species in the future? So for sexually reproducing, right, the only way that we can change the species in the future is through our offspring, okay? We pass on our genes from generation to generation through our offspring. And if we're sexually reproducing, well, how do we make offspring? Well, what has to happen is you have to have a sperm unite with an egg to make a fertilized cell, right? So obviously, whenever a sexually reproducing species undergoes a change, that's because that change was reflected in its sex cells, okay? Think about it this way, right? Each sex cell contains half of the genetic blueprint, right? So this is actually missing this half, and this egg is missing this half. So when they combine together, they produce an individual with the full blueprint, okay? Now, if this egg cell, for example, contained a mutation, let's say in its blueprint, in its instruction manual, all of a sudden, a section was changed, right? This will actually get passed on to a new generation, right? This will combine with the sperm to make a brand new individual with this change, right? This half will contain that mutation. So the correct answer here has to be choice 1. Changes in the egg cells in the ovaries of the plant's flower will allow them to pass on that change to future generations because sex cells pass on genetic information, right? If you have a variation inside of non-sex cells, that variation will never get to your kids. That variation will never get to your offspring because the only type of cell that leaves your body or that leads to the development of a new being are your sex cells, your egg and your sperm. So if the change isn't in your egg or your sperm, guess what? You're not passing that on. You're still affected by it. Your body cells are still affected by it. Sure, your leaves and flowers and roots are affected by it, but guess what? As long as it does not affect your egg or your sperm, you're not going to pass it on. So now we're going to go ahead and move on to number 15. It says many factors go into producing goods that are used by many people in their everyday lives. In the manufacturing and the production of goods, the use of energy is always positive, can only be negative, is neither positive nor negative, or can have both positive and negative effects. Well, it's the fact that it can have both positive and negative effects, right? Nothing is ever that black and white. Sure, we can produce nuclear weapons, which are terrible for the environment and terrible for humans, but at the same time, we can produce vaccines that can save lives, or we can produce inventions that can stabilize ecosystems. So yes, we have access to a lot of energy, and we can use that energy to produce both good and bad things. So that's why it's choice 4. It's never only negative or only positive, okay? Number 16 says that the illustration below represents two cellular processes, A and B. Select the row in the table that correctly identifies the cellular process. So in this case, we have one cell or one circle splitting into two. And whenever I have one circle splitting into two, I'm automatically going to think about mitosis. And there's only one choice that labels this as mitosis, okay? Now, why can't it be meiosis? Well, it can't be meiosis because meiosis is one cell or one precursor splitting into 1, 2, 3, 4 cells, right? It's actually simplified, right? It's actually one cell splitting into 2, and then those 2 cells splitting into 2 more cells for a total of 4, right? Obviously, well, you can be saying, oh, well, isn't this just the first step of meiosis? Well, that's false because this is the full pathway. This is the full process, right? So the full process should actually produce 4 if it's meiosis. If it's mitosis, it should only produce 2. Okay, so that's why it can't be meiosis. Recombination happens inside of the nucleus, right? The nucleus, recombination is happening inside the nucleus when some DNA is exchanged with its with another chromosome. Right, so that's kind of like a reformatting of that blueprint inside of your nucleus, right? But obviously here we have a whole cell, not the nucleus. And fertilization is actually process B. Fertilization is when 2 cells come together to produce 1, right? In the process of fertilization. Right, so number 17 says that the food web is represented below. A chemical was introduced in the environment that caused a decrease in the population of mice. So the way that one of these diagrams works is any sort of arrow shows the flow of energy. So the flow of energy, or the flow of food, right, because food is energy, from the grass automatically goes to the crickets, the mice, and the rabbits. So the rabbits, the mice, and the crickets eat the energy or take in the energy from the grass. Then, let's just focus on mice since it's asking about mice, right? Then the energy from the mice then goes to the owls, to the hawks, and to the snakes, okay? Now it's asking us, if we have a decrease in the population of mice, this would most likely cause what? And automatically we can eliminate choices 1, 2, and 3, because guess what? If there isn't an arrow, there's no relationship between these two species, right? If there's not an arrow, that means that there's no energy transfer. So if this arrow doesn't exist, that means there's no energy transfer. So let's look over here, right? The shrubs and the trees, is there any arrow going from them to the mouse? No. So that means that their energy is never incorporated into the mice, right? The mice don't eat trees, they don't eat shrubs, and they don't eat deers. So as a result, their population, their life, their existence, their population size is independent from deers, trees, and shrubs. If it was related, there would be a line. In this case, it isn't. Where there is a line is to the snakes, right? So the snakes eat the mice, and they only eat mice. So if all of a sudden the population of the mice plummeted, guess what? The snakes would have no food. If they have no food, they have no energy. If they have no energy, number 1, they can't live. And number 2, they can't live long enough to reproduce, to make more of themselves. So that would actually cause a decrease in their population. Number 6 says population of organisms making up the Arctic food chain are represented below. Which statement concerning this food chain is the most accurate? And automatically we can eliminate choice 4. Because it says the organisms in this chain can all produce their own energy during long periods of cold weather. Can a polar bear make its own energy? No, it has to eat something. What does it have to eat? It has to eat this seal. How do I know? Because its arrow is going from the seal to the polar bear. So in a food chain, it's a linear path, right? It's a straight line, and each arrow represents who's eating who, or where the energy is transferred from, right? So in the food chain, essentially the producer is always the one on the left, and the apex predator, or the last predator, is always on the right in this case. So here we know that the algae is the producer because it doesn't eat anyone, right? There's no energy flowing into it. This has its own energy because it makes its own energy, okay? So from knowing that, we can eliminate choice 2 because zooplanktons are not producers, they're consumers, right? They're taking their energy from where? They're taking their energy from the algae. Okay, and that's why choice 3 is the most important and most correct choice, right? A reduction in the algae populations will most likely affect the survival of all other populations, okay? If you mess with the producers, you mess with the entire food chain and food web, because that's where the food web gets its energy from the producers, right? If you mess with the algae population, guess what? The zooplankton population decreases, the Arctic cod decreases, the ringed seal decreases, and the polar bear decreases, right? Everyone gets their energy at some point from the algae, right? So it's a cascading effect, right? It's a chain reaction in this case if you mess with the algae. Okay, and choice 1 is wrong because the greatest amount of energy is always stored in the producer, not the final consumer, right? Number 19 says the protein in hamburger is broken down into amino acids. Which two processes are involved in the breakdown of the protein and the absorption of the amino acid in the bloodstream? So what's another word for breakdown? Well, digestion. And what's another word for absorption? Diffusion. So it has to be choice 2. If you're breaking something down, synthesis means to make something. Okay, so if you're breaking down a protein, you're breaking it down. You're not synthesizing, you're not making anything new out of it, right? Mitosis, right? If you're breaking down a hamburger, why are you making more copies of your cell? That doesn't make sense. What you want to do is you want to digest it. You want to break it down further, right? Digestion and break down are two synonyms, right? They mean the same thing. And finally, replication. What do you need to replicate? Why are you replicating something if you're just digesting it? That doesn't make sense, right? So digestion is the same thing as breakdown, and diffusion is the same thing as absorption, right? When something diffuses across a membrane or across a cell, it enters it. Number 20 says that Tatara are the last survivors of an ancient group of reptiles that lived in the same time as the dinosaurs. Tatara contain a very large genome. Remember that the genome, a gene is a section of DNA. The genome is all of the DNA, right? It's every single instruction in their blueprint or in their nucleus or in their chromosomes. However, whatever word you want to use to describe genetic information in this case, however organized you want it to be, right? And we know that their genome is 2/3 bigger than the human genome. One possible explanation for why Tatara have survived since prehistoric times is that their large genome has done what? Well, first of all, their large genome cannot mutate, right? A species cannot mutate at their own will, right? Mutations are always random. Choice 3 is saying that, well, they can mutate whenever they want, right? I can't do that. If I want to be taller, I can't just magically be taller and mutate my own genes, right? That has to happen randomly, okay? So species cannot randomly mutate, and also species cannot rearrange their genes to specifically evolve, right? A species doesn't just say, oh, okay, well, I'm ready to evolve to be the next big species, right? I can't. No one can, right? Species don't choose that. That all happens randomly, right? It's pushed by natural selection, but the species doesn't make that choice, okay? So they can't mutate on their own. They can't rearrange their genes on their own. So we're dealing with 1 and 2. Now, if we have a very large genome, we have a very large blueprint, we have a lot of different designs that we can use, right? Well, if it's too cold, we can insulate our house better. If it's too hot, we can take away some of that insulation. As a matter of fact, we can actually put in some ACs. Their genome is so large that it pretty much accounts for every single environmental change that can happen, which is why it's choice 2, right? Their large genome, their really, really big instruction manual provided the members with characteristics or features that gave them advantages help you survive, for survival in changing environments, right? Okay. So if something changes, they have pretty much all of the instructions to account for that change. And choice 1 is wrong because it's saying that the Earth has not gone through any environmental changes. That's false, right? Since the dinosaurs, are you kidding me? We had a mass extinction event. An entire asteroid hit us, right? That is a crazy big change, right? So that's why choice 1 is incorrect. Number 21 says 2 primary chemical messengers used in communication within the human body include hormones and chemicals produced by nerve cells. Chemicals produced by nerve cells are called neurotransmitters, and hormones are the best example of signaling molecules, right? Organic catalysts and enzymes are the same thing. They catalyze reactions, they make them go quicker, they don't communicate, right? Antibodies and pathogens, well, antibodies can be used as chemical messengers. Actually, they can, right? That's antigens, not antibodies. Don't get that mixed up. Antibodies just kill viruses, and pathogens are foreign invaders like viruses and bacteria, right? So the only thing that actually communicates, the only two things that the cell uses to communicate are hormones and neurotransmitters, right? Generally. There's other types of molecules, but those are 2 very, very common examples, right? Number 22 says Holstein cows have become the most widespread breed of dairy cows in the United States. They have been selectively bred to have many characteristics beneficiary to dairy farmers. Holsteins are known for their ability to produce large quantities of milk, and in addition, they are often calm and agreeable animals. Which statement best selects or best describes a potential risk, right, of selective breeding to future generations of Holstein dairy cows, okay? So a risk is something that's bad, right? So it's something that could go wrong. Choice 4, choice 3, and choice 2 are all positive events, right? If it improves the health of future generations, why is it a risk? That's actually a good thing. It's not risky to be healthy. It's good to be healthy, right? That's not a risk of this. So when you're talking about a risk, you're talking about something that has to be negative. If you're improving their health, that is something that's positive. Choice 3 is wrong because it results in highly productive and long-lived animals, right? If you live long, that's a very good thing, right? That's not a risk. That's a benefit. And choice 2, it increases the risk of having even more desired characteristics. That's even better, right? You're making even better cows. That's not a risk. Right? You're making cows that produce even more milk. That's great for dairy farmers. What isn't great for dairy farmers is that genetic diversity in the breed becomes limited. You want to have high genetic diversity, right? You want high biodiversity, high genetic diversity, right? If you have low genetic diversity, guess what? That is very bad, right? If all the cows are genetically identical, if there's a certain disease that affects only the gene of this cow, right, or only this type of cow, they will all get affected by it because they all have the same genes. They're all identical. So that's why we need variation to kind of minimize the chance of everyone being affected or impacted by something. Number 23 says an organism that has 32 chromosomes in its body cells is found to be producing gametes with either 15 or 17 chromosomes and has not been able to successfully reproduce. The most likely reason for its inability to reproduce would be errors during the process of what? So remember, gametes are sex cells. And how do we produce sex cells? Well, we produce sex cells through meiosis. So any issue regarding sex cells is going to be tied back to meiosis, okay? It's not mitosis because mitosis won't touch gametes, right? Mitosis doesn't have to do anything with the production of gametes. The issue here is that we're producing gametes incorrectly, right? How do we know that? Well, number one, they don't have half the number of chromosomes. Gametes have half the number of chromosomes. If you start with 32 chromosomes, right? And you can think about a chromosome as a condensed part of the DNA. So if the DNA is the instruction manual, right? Instead of having this giant piece of paper, the cell will split it up into chapters called chromosomes or sections called chromosomes. So again, remember, a sex cell has half of this blueprint. So if you have 32 chapters, each sperm and each egg will have 16 chapters. In this case, they didn't do an easy split or an even split. You know that uneven split is in the gametes. You know that meiosis is the only thing that you can do to produce gametes, so it has to be an issue in meiosis. Number 24 asks us to describe the correct flow of energy through an ecosystem, and the correct answer is obviously 4. It always has to start with producers. So choice 2 and 3 are off. We saw energy pyramid, a food chain, and a food web. They all started with producers. Then what happens is they get consumed. The consumers die, and then the decomposers eat the dead body from the consumer and then recycle those nutrients back into the soil. Choice 1 is wrong because guess what? A herbivore is a type of consumer. Right? These are the same thing. It's redundant. Both of these should be included as a consumer. A herbivore is not different from a consumer. Same thing. Right? So this is actually missing a decomposer, which is essential for a complete flow of energy. Number 25 says an amoeba is a single-celled aquatic organism that is represented below. Which one of the amoeba's cell structures is the most important for maintaining oxygen from its environment? So if the oxygen is in its environment, that means it's surrounded by it, and it needs to obtain it, meaning it needs to get it. So what is stopping this oxygen from entering the cell? Well, it's this barrier called the cell membrane, right? The cell membrane is what keeps the inside of the cell from spilling out, and it's keeping the outside of the cell from, or whatever's on the outside of the cell, from just rushing in. So if you want to uptake this oxygen, you want to bring it inside of your cell, guess what? Your cell wall will have to regulate that, right? Your cell wall will allow for this oxygen to come through, either through channels or it will just diffuse across, okay? The mitochondria uses the oxygen to produce ATP, but it's not the reason why we get it into our cells, right? The cell membrane does that. The reason why it's not I circled cell wall, guys. The correct answer was actually choice 1. The reason why it's not a cell wall is because this is not a plant. An amoeba is an animal, right? It's a single-celled aquatic organism. It's not a plant cell, okay? If it was a plant cell, it would have a cell wall, and it would look something like this, right? It would be in a square shape. Amoebas are not plants, so they don't have cell walls. They have cell membranes. That's what's regulating it. And ribosomes produce proteins. They don't have anything to do with oxygen, okay? So number 26 says the diagram below represents a specialized gamete. Well, guys, what kind of gamete is this? This is a sperm, right? It has the head and the tail. And it's saying that the proper functioning of cells like these is vital for human reproduction because of what? Why is the sperm so important? What makes it so unique? Well, what makes it so unique and what makes any sex cell so unique is that the fact that they have half of the genetic blueprint. So that's choice 4, right? Its nucleus carries half the genetic information needed to form a zygote. That is the only special thing about a sperm, right? A lot of cells have tails, so don't worry about the tail part. Choice 2 is false, right? It's not about the fact that it can deliver genetic information. It's the fact that it has this genetic information to begin with. There's no other cell, if you're a man, there's no other cell in this case that will have half of your blueprint just ready on the go to transmit that information to another cell that has half that blueprint as well, right? This is what actually allows for human reproduction. Not the tail, but the actually having half of this blueprint inside of there. That's the most important part. Number 27 says if the amount of carbon dioxide and water availability increases, it is most likely that the first response by the producer organisms would be to what? Well, they have to increase glucose synthesis, right? The producer organisms do what? Producer organisms make their own food, and they do that via photosynthesis. That's H2O, water, plus CO2, plus sunlight that gets turned into sugar. Remember, sugar and O2. Sugar and glucose are the same thing. Glucose is a type of sugar. So if all of a sudden you start to water your plants more and you start to expose them to more sunlight and more carbon dioxide, they can then produce more energy because they can undergo photosynthesis more. They now have more materials to use to produce these products, okay? DNA synthesis, amino acid synthesis, and nucleic acid synthesis. Guess what? Your animal cells and plant cells make DNA, animal cells and plant cells make amino acids or proteins, and animal and plant cells make nucleic acid. Furthermore, the production of these processes requires ATP, not water, and not carbon dioxide, not sunlight, right? If this is unique to producers, only producers make sugars. Only producers synthesize their own sugar using water and CO2, right? Everything else in yellow is not unique to producers and does not require H2O or CO2 to be produced. Number 28 says that there's high numbers of stray and feral cats in communities across the United States, and in order to humanely control these cat populations, many areas are participating in programs to trap, spay, and release the animals. When a female cat is spayed, organs are surgically removed to prevent the animal from being able to reproduce. Which 2 organs are most likely to be removed? So automatically, if we look at this list of organs, it can't be choice 3. Because if you remove a cat's stomach, it'll starve and die, right? We want the cat to still be alive. We just don't want the cat to be able to reproduce anymore. And now, if we are aware of the fact that we're dealing with a female cat here, we know we can eliminate choice 4 because guess what? Do females have testes? No. Females have ovaries. Ovaries are where the ovum or the egg are produced, and testes are in the males where the sperm are produced, right? If this is a female cat, it won't have testes, it would have ovaries. And finally, we're dealing with between ovaries and uterus, or uterus and placenta. And the reason why it's going to be choice 2 and not choice 1, because the ovaries are where the eggs are produced, right? So if you get rid of the ovaries, guess what? There's no more eggs being produced in this animal, and at the same time the eggs go to the uterus whenever they're fertilized. So if you get rid of the uterus, not only do you not have a place for the eggs to go, but that combined with having no ovaries means you have no way of reproducing again, right? The reason why it's not choice 1 is sure, the uterus is a correct answer choice here, but the placenta only develops after pregnancy. So this develops after you're already pregnant. So you want to prevent that animal from being pregnant in the first place. So how are you going to take away an organ that only gets formed when you're pregnant? Well, guess what? You can't, right? The cat needs to be pregnant to have a placenta first, so you can't even remove it unless it's already pregnant. So number 29 says, when you purchase a fishing license in New York, you're told to check the advisory tables before consuming any fish that you catch. The tables list the fish species you should and should not eat, and others that you can eat up to 4 times a month. A likely reason that the table recommends that children under the age of 15 and young women should not eat any of the fish caught in some bodies of water is why? Well, it's because that the chemicals may affect their development or harm the potential unborn children. Remember that we're eating them up to 4 times a month, or there's a limit due to the presence of toxic chemicals in the fish. So they already told you you can only eat this fish up to 4 times a month because it's so toxic. Now, if something is so toxic, why might you not want to give it to pregnant women and young children? Because guess what? That'll mess up their development, right? Young children and pregnant women have cells inside of their body that are rapidly dividing. Divide, copy, 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 copy. So if one of these cells is affected, right? If one of these cells is damaged, guess what? It'll make a bunch of copies of its damaged self. And guess what? What would that do? That would harm their development and stunt their growth, which is very bad. All right, all these other choices don't make sense, right? If the species were, if the fish was close to extinction, they wouldn't allow you to fish at all, right? And choice 3 is not wrong. These chemicals build up in males and females at the same time, right? Number 30 is asking examples for 2 abiotic resources. Abiotic means non-living. So if something is non-living, it's abiotic. Nitrogen and carbon dioxide are just molecules. They are non-living. Animals are living, plant species are living, and decomposers are all alive, right? Gases are not living. So that's the end of this video. If you have any questions, please feel free to let me know in the comments below. Again, if you want to move on to the next part of this exam, that video has already been posted and the link to it can be found, again, in the description of this video. I hope you guys learned something and I hope you have a nice day.